Hello and a very warm welcome to your local part of the show. This week, is the government turning its back on millions of pounds of European money that could help clear up damage caused by flooding? Well, one of Labour's Euro MPs in the North East, Jude Curtin-Darling, says that's precisely the case, and she's here in the studio alongside Jonathan Arnott, her equivalent from UKIP, who claims Labour's not giving the whole picture. Also discussing that and the rest of the week's political news is North East Conservative peer Lord Callanan. Welcome to you all. And coming up, why ballot papers are going out in County Durham but nowhere else, as people there are asked for their views on the government's devolution deal and a mayor. But first, it's been another terrible week for the steel industry. Tata cut more than 1,000 jobs, mainly at Port Talbot in South Wales, but 62 were also lost in Hartlepool. It follows, of course, the closure of the Redcar steel plant with a loss of 2,000 jobs. And the town's MP, Anna Turley, told Parliament she had particular concerns about the way some redundant steelworkers on Teesside were being treated.
Unfortunately, despite good work by many job centre staff, numerous constituents have contacted me to raise the dehumanising treatment they feel they have received in job centres. Many of these workers have never been out of work, and the experience of being on the dole for many of them, like so many others of my constituency, is horrendous.
Anna Turley there. Martin Callanan, let's start with the situation for former steelworkers in Redcar. What Anna Turley went on to say in that debate is that she says some of them have been threatened with benefit sanctions for not applying for bar work and shop work. That can't be right, can it?
No, it can't. I mean, we don't know what the individual circumstances are applying to individual workers, but I would hope that they're treated with humility and respect in job centres, and I hope that the job centres are doing all they possibly can to get them into other works. And we do have, of course, other good news. There's been some bad news on jobs in the region, but there are good news on jobs as well. There are new jobs being created, and the job of job centres is to try to push them into those jobs.
More than half those steelworkers are on the dole still 4 months after closure. Is that to be expected, or is it depressing? It
will depend on the individual circumstances of those workers concerned. But I mean, there's no question that the whole history of the steel industry in the North East recently is tragic. I mean, it's awful for the families and for the workers concerned. OK, we'll come back to that. Jude Curtin-Darling, those sort of stories, they sound bad, but they're anecdotal, aren't they? There's little solid evidence that it's happening, and the government has put money into supporting workers in the area.
Well, I think the reality is what Anna has reported from her constituents. Like you said, half of the steel workers affected are still yet to find a job. And that's because we lack, as a country, a proper industrial policy. This government has completely failed to support the development of good, high-quality manufacturing jobs. And the situation in the steel sector is really tragic. But retraining people when there are no jobs then to go into is very, very difficult. We need to be creating jobs. Part of that is about using the European funds that we'll get as a region in the next 6 years to really support an industrial renaissance across Teesside and ensure that those highly qualified workers have a decent future.
Jonathan Arnott, I mean, there's a political row here, obviously you can hear, but what sense do you get of the support that's on offer to workers in Teesside? Good enough?
My general impression is no, it's not good enough. The point is that when you've got that many people unemployed in a small area, particularly in Redcar, then you end up with a situation where job creation has to be the #1 priority. If you don't create jobs in that area, then there simply aren't the jobs for workers to go to, and you're going to find
Isn't that what the government's doing? Unemployment fell this week, and as Martin Callanan said, there is good job news. OK, it might not be on the doorstep of Redcar, but it's impossible to just bring jobs in straight away.
You've only got to go back to 2007, 2008, when actually the North East's unemployment was very, very close to the national average. That gap today is 4 times what it was then. But specifically in Redcar, when you're looking at thousands of jobs that need to be replaced, what I think we need to be seeing is more proactive approach from the government than we're getting.
OK, Martin Callanan, I suppose this cuts to the heart of what a lot of people have said about your government's attitude to the steel industry. It's just sitting there and watching a major industry die.
Well, it's not, is the answer to your question. We're doing all we possibly can. We're doing action in terms of energy prices, in terms of anti-dumping tariffs on China. But fundamentally, the problem with the steel industry is that the price of steel has halved in 18 months. There's nothing the government can do about the world situation. What we can do is generate jobs in other areas and other industries. And since 2010, we've generated 2.3 million more jobs in the economy, many of them in high-value manufacturing. We have Hitachi opening on Teesside. Nissan have generated thousands more jobs. So new jobs are being created. We all want to see more being done, but they are being created.
Jude Curtin-Darling, the government says it's doing enough.
Well, it basically isn't. And you can see the way that the steel crisis is developing, not just in the northeast, but across the whole country, that we're not doing enough. Look at the other countries across the European Union, where governments have stepped in, where they have an industrial policy and a manufacturing agenda at national level. And then you see the possibilities.
Why didn't Labour do this when they were in office? There were 33,000 steel workers lost their jobs during a Labour government as well. These are difficult issues.
I think the reality, Martin, is that the last Labour government gave, for example, a £100 million loan guarantee to Sheffield Forge Masters to ensure that we could supply the steel for the nuclear build. We are giving away contracts to the Chinese at the moment.
We'll have to leave that discussion there, I'm afraid. I'm sure there's plenty more we could have talked about. I'm sure the industry will be making news for a while to come. Now, is the government failing to apply for European money that could be helping communities in Cumbria and the North East and North Yorkshire hit by recent flooding? Well, that's the claim by Labour and the Liberal Democrats, who say EU solidarity funding is available for countries affected by natural disasters. And the Stockton North Labour MP, Alex Cunningham, who's Shadow Floods Minister, has urged the government to apply for the money before the deadline runs out. But as with much else in Europe, things aren't always that straightforward. Here's Mark Denton.
Avril named her home in Hayden Bridge because it's close to the River Tyne, but last month the river came to her. The house has been drying out ever since.
Really frightening. The carpet was floating in the hall, the water was way above my knee, the current was really frightening, and I didn't realise that, neither did my husband.
Thankfully, the floodwaters have finally gone down, not just for Avril, but of course the hundreds of other people in our region affected. But they've left behind a great big bill. Now, the government has promised financial help, but there's also millions of pounds of European money available, money that is specifically designed to help battered communities.
Rivers where roads should be and flooded homes. Scenes familiar, of course, from the last few weeks. But this is actually North Yorkshire back in 2007. The government got money from the European Solidarity Fund set up to help countries hit by natural disasters. Councils in our region got over £480,000 to help with the clean-up.
The fund has paid out over £3 billion in the last 12 years since it came into existence, but it was of course mainly the countries that have been repeatedly affected by these disasters, and here one country sticks out, particularly Italy. Italy received £1 billion in the past 12 years.
But despite the damage caused by storms Desmond, Eva and Frank, and of course the cost of putting it right, the government hasn't yet applied for any money under that scheme. Time is running out as well. Applications have to be in by the end of next month. And some have now accused the government of dragging their feet for political reasons.
The fundamental reason is that too many people who are Conservative MPs are anti-Europe and don't want us to do something which, as well as being great news for flood victims, would also be a good news story about the European Union.
But there's a snag with the scheme. If Britain applies, its EU rebate is reduced. So when Britain last applied after the 2007 floods, it was awarded £110 million. But over two-thirds of it, nearly £80 million, was lopped off the rebate. The government hasn't ruled out applying again, but speaking earlier this month, the Prime Minister sounded reluctant.
It takes a very long time to get hold of any money. It's very uncertain about whether you will get it, and indeed you end up paying for it in many ways as well. So I think it's quicker and better to give people the help they need from our own resources.
But this week Labour sent an open letter to the Environment Secretary urging her to apply for money under the scheme. And back in Hayden Bridge, the clean-up continues for Avril. She'll be out of her home until at least the summer, and reckons ministers should grab that EU flood money while they can.
This country pays a lot into the EU, and why can't we get something back? Why can't we? People all over the country, Carlisle, we all need help. All these counties need help, but we need that big money.
Well, curse up. Well, she's clear. She thinks she should be applying for the money. Jonathan Arnott, the government says it's not worth the bother, potentially. Labour Lib Dems say, yes, we must go for it. What's your view?
Look, whilst we're in the European Union, of course it's nice to say, can we please have a little bit of our own money back? The problem in this case is that for every £3 that we apply for in that funding, we're going to lose £2 of that out of the rebate the following year. So you get some back, but then you have to hand a little bit of that back itself. And once you've taken into account all of the admin costs, the fact that it's going to take so much time for the money to come through, look, yeah, I think we probably should just about on balance go for it, but it's such a marginal decision. It's not what Tim Farron's suggesting, that this is some amazing victory for pro-EU people if we get some of our own money back and then have to give some of it away again. It's nothing like that. Okay. But whilst we're in the EU, if it's just slightly better to have it than not, then I suppose, yeah, we should go for it.
Duke Darling, the government's view seems to be that it's not worth the grief.
Well, it feels like that's the government's view on everything to do with the North at the moment. It wasn't worth the grief saving the steel industry. It's not worth the grief going for money for food banks, and it's not worth the grief going for the floods money. But the crucial... You can see the point, can't you? I mean, you know, if you've got to go through an application process, you're never quite sure how much you're going to get back, when it's going to come back. You might as well say, look, the urgency is to do something now. We'll put our money in and just forget about this European funding. Well, in fact, it's all calculated on the estimated cost to the economy of the flood. So it's pretty guaranteed what you get back. And as Jonathan said, we actually get more back as a result of applying in the end. It's a net gain for the UK. So it makes no political sense at all that we don't go and we don't apply for that money.
Martin Cullinan, if I was given a tenner and they said to me, well, you're going to have to pay £7 of it back next year, I'll just put the £7 in the bank, spend the £3. Why can't we do that?
When I knew this was coming up today, I went and checked this with the officials responsible to get chapter and verse on this. Firstly, the government haven't ruled out applying. They're going through the process of estimating all the damages now before they decide whether to apply or not. Secondly, it's a very bureaucratic process. It has to be approved by 27 other member states and, as Jude and Jonathan will know, in the European Parliament. Thirdly, we lose a large proportion anyway of that back through our rebate. And fourthly, none of that money can go to individuals or businesses affected. It just reimburses the government for money that they've already spent, and it could be 9 or 10 months before we get it. So we haven't ruled it out. Now, nobody's saying if there's free money there, of course, the government will apply. But on previous occasions, when governments of both political persuasions have looked at this, they've decided actually it's going to cost more to apply for it and to go through the bureaucratic hoops than we get a benefit by obtaining it.
If you were advising the government, would you say don't bother?
It's a marginal decision. The officials are going through that the details at the moment, and they haven't ruled out applying. But you know, this is not going to be a substantial new pot of money. It just reimburses the government a small proportion of the money that they've already spent.
Is there anything in at all in what Tim Farron says about the fact that it might be a bit inconvenient for the Prime Minister to be getting a good story out of Europe when he's got so many Eurosceptic MPs?
Not at all. I mean, I spoke to the officials. They say they are going through the process now. They're going through the calculations as to whether it's worth it or not. And what government would not apply for money if they thought they were going to get, as Jonathan says, at least a small proportion of our own money back again? You know, we are strapped for cash in this country. We have a massive budget deficit. Of course we'll get money back if we possibly can. But we have to ask if the whole process is worth the trouble. And it's not going to make any difference to the individual communities.
Well, your example about £10 and £7, I'd take that one step further. It's about if we've given £20 over to the European Union, they then are saying, well, we'll let you have £10 of funding back, but you've got to give us another £7. It's a little bit like that. And then the question is, the real question on this debate, and why it is such a minute issue compared with the vast amounts of money we're giving to the EU, is that other £3 might just be about the cost of administration.
Okay.
We should be talking about the 20, not the 3.
This is not a great advert, as Jonathan Arnott says, for our membership of the European Union, is it? Having to sort of go cap in hand for our own money back and then having more of it clawed back afterwards.
On the contrary, this is a great example of how the European Union actually can help ordinary people across the UK. This is a fund that was set up to deal with natural disasters where normal people are affected by things completely out of their control, as we saw with the rains in December. The key thing is that it's the choice of the national government if they want to channel that money back to the local level. Okay. There would be nothing to stop the UK government saying the extra money that we get goes directly to the people who are affected in Hayden Bridge, in Cumbria and elsewhere.
You cannot give it to individuals or businesses. Okay. That's part of the rules of the scheme.
All right, well, we're not going to agree on that one, and we'll have to leave it there. We'll see what happens with that application process, whether it happens or not. Now, ballot papers have gone out and voting is underway. People in County Durham are getting a say over government plans to transfer powers over employment, transport, skills to a North East combined authority of councils overseen by an elected mayor. But there is a catch. The rest of the North East actually isn't voting. And even in Durham, it's a consultative, not a binding ballot. Well, I asked Durham County Council leader Simon Hennig what the point of holding a vote was.
Personally, I was always very uncomfortable with the idea that myself as one person could make a decision on behalf of 500,000 people without that form of consultation. And I think it's entirely right to be asking people across County Durham what they think, so that when we do come to that final decision, we can have confidence that we're doing something that most people, or at least most people that respond in the survey, feel comfortable with.
Simon Hennig. Well, campaigners on both sides of the argument are trying to influence voters in Durham. Trade unions are among those backing a campaign for the North East to turn down the devolution deal and that mayor, while the G9 group of North East chartered surveyors say if Durham's voters reject the idea, the region could be hopelessly split when it comes to attracting investment.
Durham would be on its own, then we'd have the North East left, and then arguably Teesside's in the North East, but that's on its own anyway. So, you know, you have to ask who on earth and how is the region going to be marketed across the globe for inward investment, such as the Nissans we've already got and the Hitachis.
Particularly for Durham and for Northumberland, but also for the other councils, there's not enough in it, and it's going to be damaging for rural areas. There is not enough information, not enough discussion, not enough explanation. The only question the public should have been asked was, do you want an executive elected mayor for an area covering from Bishop Auckland to Berwick?
What's the views, pro and anti? Martin Callanan, isn't Durham doing the government's job here? Actually, the change is big of this. A mayor stretching, as Michael Lloyd said, from Berwick to Bishop Auckland. There should have been a referendum.
Well, the trouble with referendum, in principle, I'm in favour of referenda. I think they're a good thing to consult people. But this is a very complicated issue. Referendums are good for simple yes or no answers. This is a detailed negotiation about what powers will be devolved, how much money is involved, the political ramifications. All the other Labour authorities in the region have decided to go along with it without a referendum. Durham have decided to have one. I think it's a waste of £500,000, but if that's how they want to choose to spend their council taxpayers' money, that's up to them.
£230,000, they say. But you're saying voters are not intelligent enough to look through this deal, and not intelligent enough to work out that whether they want a mayor for this huge area or not.
I didn't say that, Richard. I said the referenda are best suited to simple yes-no answer. This is not.
Isn't the mayor a simple yes or no answer?
But because it's not just the mayor, it's about all of the devolution deal that's associated with it. It's about the devolution of transport powers, of health powers, of social security powers, powers across a whole range of areas for the region to decide things for ourselves.
Okay.
You know, it's a choice. We don't have to accept it. Labour authorities in other parts of the country have decided to go along with it. They're pushing ahead with devolution deals. Now, if the Labour Party in the North East cannot make its mind up whether it wants to have more devolved power and more devolved money, then it's up to them. But I think it would be a missed opportunity for the region.
We may put that to Judith Curtin-Doyle in a moment. But Durham's doing this. It's a poll, not a referendum, not binding. But it's more of a say than a lot of the people in other Labour council areas in this region are having. Shouldn't all the councils have done this?
Well, in fact, all of the councils have their own way of consulting the public.
They're not sending things to every household like Durham is.
But there are public consultations open. There are processes of asking people if they want, what their concerns are about the process. They're trying to engage in different ways. Durham have decided to go this way. I do find it slightly bizarre that for Martin, who's someone who's campaigned for a referendum on our European Union membership, which is a highly complex question, we have a very integrated relationship, lots of policy areas concerned, is then criticising the idea that you ask the public about how their local government is organised. And I think what we should be absolutely clear about here is that this is a fait accompli from central government, where the different local authorities are trying to engage the population locally to get their feedback. But really, central government is fragmenting our region and is trying to split us up.
They've been offered powers and money. What is there to say no to?
Well, offered powers and money, but if you dig into what that powers and money actually is compared to the situation now, we have been hit as a region extremely hard by this government in terms of local government cuts and so on. And you know, I think it's right that there's a democratic discussion about whether this is really a good deal for the region, and each of the local authorities is allowing that discussion in its own way, decided locally. Surely that's what devolved government's about.
Jonathan Arnott, UKIP likes the idea of local referendums, doesn't it? It's as part of its policies. Should councils across the region have offered voters a say on this? You know, more than just a consultation, a genuine say?
Look, there should be a genuine say on this. Of course there should. You know, the last time this was discussed in a slightly different format, back in 2004, voters in the North East overwhelmingly rejected a devolution deal. If a different devolution deal comes on the table, of course it should be put to voters in a referendum. These issues don't have to be too complex. Yes, the European Union is a complex issue, but at the same time, you can ask the question, you know, do you prefer to be governed by the Union Jack or by the Brussels Ring of Stars? You know, you can look at it that, you can look at these things that way. But in this issue, on this issue, there is a front that, you know, it's very easy to make it into something quite simple, quite understandable, and we shouldn't insult the intelligence of voters. If you believe in voters, if you give them a chance, they will have their say.
On from that, you've alluded to the fact that you know, Labour Council leaders are, you know, seem reluctant, but what they're saying this week is that...
Well, some are and some aren't, is the answer to your
what
question.
they're saying this week is that they wanted answers from civil servants about the detail of this. They're not getting it, and they're actually saying a deal probably won't happen until the summer at the very earliest now.
Well, I think if that is the case, then that would be regrettable. Other Labour authorities in other parts of the country, in Manchester, in West Yorkshire, are happy to work with the government in terms of getting more money, getting more powers, getting more responsibility for house servants that come in their areas. It is all about an internal dispute in the Labour Party. They can't decide amongst themselves who is to get the goodies, how is to be divvied up, who is to be supplied the mayor candidates, etc. And they really can't make up the mind whether they do or not.
Labour leaders dragging their feet.
No, I think Labour leaders are asking legitimate questions on behalf of their constituents across the region,
even if it means
and we're
that
not
this area
getting those
out.
answers
well, how
back.
come Labour leaders in Manchester and West Yorkshire are perfectly happy with it?
We don't want the North East to miss out if it's a decent deal, but the government has to answer the clear questions which have been tabled so that we can go to our constituents and to the electorate across the North East and make the case.
I'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much. Well, there was good news on unemployment, as we mentioned this week, as the jobless total dropped, but that was of little comfort to the people losing work at a factory in Berwick. Here's Mark with that and the rest of the week's news in 60 seconds.
Unemployment's fallen in the North East. It's down 6,000 on the previous quarter, but it's still the highest in the country. In Cumbria, the number of job seekers allowance claimants rose slightly. The Just Roll factory in Berwick is to close later this year with a loss of 265 jobs. The local MP, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, said the consultation over the closure had been a sham.
It's a real tragedy that we've been unable to persuade General Mills to come to the table and actually discuss how we might help them keep the production in Berwick.
Conservative MP for Skipton and Ripon, Julian Smith, said he was very disappointed to receive confirmation that both Claro and Deverell barracks are to be sold by the MOD. A protest at County Hall and an 8,000 signature petition wasn't enough to prevent the closure of the Durham Light Infantry Museum as council decided to press ahead with plans to move the collection. And finally, voters in North Tyneside are to be asked if they want the council to continue to be run by an elected mayor. Councillors agreed to hold a referendum on the issue in May.
And that's it from us. We're back same time, same place next weekend. In the meantime, you can always follow me on Twitter just to keep me company in the meaningless void my life will obviously be until I see you again. It's a tough life. For now, though, it's back to Andrew for the rest of the show.